Why is it that all the British people should pay the price for mistakes made by one single man? In a move that has sent shockwaves through British politics, former US President Donald Trump has issued a statement that could force UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer to resign. Accusing the Labour Party of meddling in the US election, Trump's explosive remarks threaten to unravel Starmer's leadership and spark an unprecedented diplomatic crisis. As tensions rise, the future of the UK's relationship with both the US and its own leadership hangs in the balance. Former US President Donald Trump has accused UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer of misconduct, alleging Labour Party involvement in US election interference. This claim has sparked a political and economic crisis, threatening Starmer's leadership and straining UK-US relations. The controversy arises from reports that over 100 Labour members, including staff, traveled to the US to support Kamala Harris during an election campaign. While Labour claims these trips were privately funded and unofficial, critics suggest Starmer tacitly approved the initiative, intending to strengthen UK-US ties. Instead, it has led to accusations of foreign meddling and diplomatic fallout. Trump escalated the issue by filing a complaint with the U.S. Federal Election Commission, accusing Labour of voter influence. He also imposed a 20% tariff on UK imports, potentially costing the British economy up to $22 billion and impacting key industries. The tariffs reflect Trump's broader strategy of using economic measures to assert power, a tactic he employed during his presidency. This retaliatory move has disrupted the UK's economic recovery and could destabilize its global trade position. Starmer faces tough choices: negotiate directly with Trump to mitigate economic damage or align with the European Union against Trump's measures, risking further strain on UK-US relations. Both options carry significant political and economic risks, challenging Starmer's ability to balance domestic priorities with international diplomacy. The crisis has broader implications, with experts warning that escalating tariffs could shrink the global GDP by up to 7%, causing widespread economic instability. It underscores the interconnected nature of modern economies, where political decisions have far-reaching global consequences. For Starmer, this is a critical test of leadership. He must protect the UK's economy while safeguarding its diplomatic standing, a balancing act that will define his tenure. The situation also highlights the risks of overstepping in international politics and the importance of aligning diplomatic ambitions with domestic responsibilities. Meanwhile, Trump's actions demonstrate his readiness to use economic leverage for political purposes, reshaping global trade dynamics. As UK-US relations hang in the balance, Starmer's decisions in the coming weeks will determine his legacy and the nation's future. The crisis serves as a stark reminder of the complexities and consequences of modern political and economic interdependence. The controversy between the United States and the United Kingdom began when former US President Donald Trump accused the UK Labour Party, led by Prime Minister Keir Starmer, of meddling in a US election. This accusation has since sparked significant tensions between the two allied nations, evolving into a political and economic crisis. Trump intensified the matter by filing an official complaint with the U.S. Federal Election Commission, alleging that Labour's actions amounted to interference in the democratic process. The fallout from this dispute has placed Starmer and his government under intense scrutiny, raising questions about the prudence of their international strategies. The situation stems from Starmer's decision to support U.S. Vice President Kamala Harris during a recent election campaign. Reports indicate that over 100 Labour members, including current and former staff, traveled to the United States to assist Harris. Labour officials have claimed these trips were personal initiatives, funded individually and lacking formal endorsement from the party. However, critics have argued that the scale and coordination of the effort suggest it was a calculated strategy approved, at least tacitly, by Starmer. The goal, they contend, was to strengthen ties with the Biden administration and secure goodwill in Washington. This move, however, has backfired spectacularly. Instead of fostering stronger diplomatic relations, it has been widely perceived as an overreach, with Labour accused of meddling in U.S. domestic affairs. Such allegations have damaged the UK's standing on the global stage, portraying the nation as inattentive to pressing domestic issues in favor of international political maneuvers. Starmer, who initially sought to enhance his party's international credibility, now faces accusations of poor judgment and misplaced priorities. Trump's reaction has been both swift and punitive. In addition to filing a formal complaint, he imposed a 20% tariff on UK imports, a move that could have devastating economic consequences for the UK. Early estimates suggest these tariffs could cost the British economy up to $22 billion, threatening key industries and potentially leading to job losses. This economic blow comes at a time when the UK is already grappling with post-Brexit challenges and global economic uncertainty. Economists warn that the tariffs could destabilize the UK's fragile recovery and undermine its competitiveness in international markets. The diplomatic fallout has placed Starmer in a precarious position. On one hand, he could seek direct negotiations with Trump to de-escalate tensions and protect the UK's economy. However, this approach risks being perceived as capitulation, which could weaken Starmer's domestic and international standing. On the other hand, aligning with the European Union to counter Trump's actions might strain UK-US relations further, jeopardizing a vital trade partnership. This dilemma underscores the delicate balance Starmer must maintain between addressing immediate economic concerns and safeguarding long-term diplomatic interests. Beyond the immediate implications for the UK, this controversy has broader global ramifications. Trump's use of tariffs as a retaliatory tool has raised concerns about the stability of international trade. Economists have warned that if this tactic escalates, it could trigger widespread economic instability, potentially reducing global GDP by as much as 7%. Such a downturn would not only affect the UK and the US, but also ripple across international markets, exacerbating inflation and deepening economic uncertainty. This crisis has become a defining moment for Keir Starmer's leadership, placing immense pressure on him to make decisions that will not only shape his political future, but also affect the UK's economic stability and diplomatic standing on the world stage. His response to the unfolding situation will ultimately determine how he is remembered as a leader, whether as someone who successfully navigated a diplomatic minefield or as one who failed to steer the country through turbulent times. The stakes could not be higher. The controversy also serves as a stark reminder of the complexities and risks inherent in modern politics. In today's interconnected world, the actions of one leader can have far-reaching consequences, both domestically and internationally. Starmer's attempt to strengthen ties between the UK and the US by supporting Kamala Harris during the election campaign, while well-intentioned, has exposed vulnerabilities that threaten to undermine both his leadership and the UK's international standing. His gamble to foster goodwill with the US has backfired, drawing unwanted attention to the potential for foreign meddling and creating tensions that could weaken the country's economic prospects. This crisis emphasizes the delicate balance between diplomacy and domestic priorities. In trying to strengthen international relations, Starmer may have overlooked the risks of overstepping, failing to anticipate how such moves might resonate back home. The situation now demands a careful, measured response, one that can restore stability while protecting both the nation's interests and Starmer's political legacy. Meanwhile, Trump's actions reflect a broader strategy of leveraging economic measures for political purposes. By imposing tariffs, he has demonstrated his willingness to act decisively, regardless of potential fallout. This approach has reshaped global trade dynamics, forcing nations to reassess their strategies and alliances. Whether viewed as a necessary recalibration or a dangerous escalation, Trump's tactics underscore the high stakes of modern geopolitics. As the crisis unfolds, the future of UK-US relations hangs in the balance. The decisions Starmer makes in the coming weeks will shape not only his political career, but also the trajectory of the nation's global standing. This situation underscores the complexities of international diplomacy, where one misstep can have far-reaching consequences for leaders and their nations. Keir Starmer's strategy to showcase solidarity with U.S. Vice President Kamala Harris, while initially designed to strengthen the relationship between the UK and the U.S., ultimately exposed a significant misstep that has come to haunt his leadership. Starmer's decision to allow more than 100 Labour Party members, including current and former staff, to travel to the U.S. to support Harris during her election campaign was presented as a diplomatic gesture aimed at solidifying ties between the two nations. However, what was meant to be an expression of international camaraderie instead highlighted a misplaced focus that sidelined more pressing concerns, particularly the economic and trade challenges facing the UK at the time. The initiative, which Labour officials insisted was a personal, unofficial effort and not an official party-backed mission, was perceived by many as a politically charged move designed to curry favor with the Biden administration. By sending numerous Labour representatives to assist Harris, Starmer hoped to strengthen the UK's ties with a Democratic administration in Washington, framing the move as an attempt to demonstrate solidarity with the incoming leadership. However, the backlash to this decision was swift and severe. Critics argued that it was emblematic of a party more focused on international political gestures than on addressing key domestic challenges, such as economic recovery, post-Brexit trade negotiations, and the UK's ongoing efforts to stabilize itself after the disruption caused by leaving the European Union. The optics of the Labour Party members in the US, cheering for Harris and visibly engaged in the campaign, struck many as a misguided priority. In a time when the UK was grappling with complex economic issues at home, many felt that Starmer's focus should have been firmly placed on protecting the UK's interests, rather than engaging in what appeared to be an unnecessary political outreach to the US. His move, rather than enhancing the UK's diplomatic standing, came across as an overreach, signaling to both domestic and international audiences that Labour was more interested in international favor than in addressing urgent issues back home. This misstep left the UK vulnerable to accusations of political interference, particularly from figures like Donald Trump, who wasted no time in capitalizing on the situation. Trump's reaction was as swift as it was aggressive. In the wake of Starmer's decision, Trump lodged a formal complaint with the U.S. Federal Election Commission, accusing the Labour Party of attempting to influence U.S. voters. While many dismissed Trump's claims as a political maneuver or a distraction, the impact of the complaint reverberated across both nations. The allegations of foreign meddling in U.S. elections led to questions about the UK's respect for U.S. sovereignty, further exacerbating tensions between the two countries. Trump, known for his combative approach to international diplomacy, quickly turned this diplomatic miscalculation into a financial one. He imposed a 20% tariff on UK imports, a move that sent shockwaves through the British economy. The tariffs were a direct response to what he framed as Labour's overstep in US election matters. For Trump, tariffs have long been a tool to assert political power, and the UK found itself squarely in the crosshairs. The tariffs were not merely symbolic. They were designed to inflict economic harm, and they did so swiftly. Early estimates suggested that the 20% tariff on UK imports could cost the British economy up to $22 billion, a blow that would reverberate across key industries, including manufacturing, agriculture, and technology. For a country already facing significant challenges, particularly after the economic strains of Brexit and the ongoing recovery from the COVID-19 pandemic, this tariff was a dangerous development. Economists warned that it could destabilize the UK's fragile recovery, hinder its ability to compete in global markets, and lead to widespread job losses. The potential consequences were severe, and many feared that the move could push the UK's economy back into recession, undoing years of slow recovery. This economic fallout demonstrated the profound risks of overstepping in international politics. Starmer's gamble to strengthen ties with the US through support for Harris, intended as a gesture of goodwill, had instead backfired, leaving the UK vulnerable to retaliatory economic measures. What had begun as an effort to strengthen the UK's diplomatic standing had transformed into a full-blown economic crisis, underscoring the delicate balance that leaders must strike between international diplomacy and domestic priorities. In this instance, Starmer's focus on international solidarity had come at the expense of addressing the UK's own critical economic issues. The broader implications for UK-US relations were also evident. The tariffs, imposed as retaliation for Labour's political actions, signaled a rift between the two nations that could have long-lasting consequences. The close trade and diplomatic relationship between the UK and the US had long been a cornerstone of the UK's foreign policy. Yet, The Labour Party's political misstep risked fracturing that relationship, potentially souring the goodwill that had been built over decades of alliance. Starmer now found himself in an unenviable position, faced with mounting pressure from both within the UK and abroad. He had to make difficult decisions to mitigate the economic damage and navigate the strained diplomatic landscape. The options before him were fraught with peril. He could seek direct negotiations with Trump, attempting to de-escalate the economic standoff and reduce the impact of the tariffs. However, such an approach could be seen as a sign of weakness, undermining his political credibility both at home and abroad. Alternatively, he could align more closely with the European Union in opposition to Trump's actions, but this would risk further damaging the UK's relationship with its largest trading partner and complicating the already tenuous position of post-Brexit Britain. In the end, Starmer's political gamble, meant to bolster the UK's standing in Washington and show support for the Biden administration, had inadvertently placed the country in a vulnerable position, economically and diplomatically. The consequences of this miscalculation were profound, with the UK facing the fallout from an ill-conceived diplomatic gesture that turned into a significant economic blow. Starmer now faces a crucial test of leadership as he seeks to navigate the fallout from his decision, balancing the need for economic recovery with the demands of international diplomacy. The outcome of this crisis will not only shape his political legacy, but also determine the future trajectory of UK-US relations. Donald Trump's actions following Keir Starmer's political misstep were far from impulsive. They were a calculated response designed to assert U.S. economic power and punish the UK for what he saw as interference in the U.S. election process. Trump, known for his unorthodox and aggressive approach to diplomacy, saw the Labour Party's actions in supporting Kamala Harris as a direct challenge to U.S. sovereignty and electoral integrity. As a result, he wasted no time in retaliating with a powerful economic weapon: tariffs. Trump's decision to impose a 20% tariff on UK imports was not just a punitive measure, but also a message, a declaration that economic leverage would be used to settle political scores. Tariffs had been a hallmark of his presidency, particularly as a tool to assert dominance in trade negotiations and to pressure other nations into compliance with his policies. During his time in office, Trump frequently used tariffs as a form of economic warfare, often targeting close allies like Canada, Mexico, and the European Union. In this case, the UK was the latest casualty of his strategy, with the tariff acting as a blunt instrument to retaliate for what he perceived as the UK's unwarranted interference in US domestic affairs. The economic implications of this move were immediate and severe. Economists have estimated that the tariffs could cost the UK economy up to $22 billion, a staggering sum that would exacerbate the country's already fragile economic position. The UK was already grappling with a host of economic challenges, including the fallout from Brexit, the lingering effects of the COVID-19 pandemic, and the ongoing struggle to negotiate favorable trade deals outside the European Union. British exporters would face significant price hikes, making their goods less competitive in the US market and potentially leading to a sharp decline in exports. This, in turn, would increase the economic strain on the UK, risking job losses, further inflation, and a stunted economic recovery. The broader consequences of Trump's tariff decision went beyond the immediate financial hit to the UK. By imposing such a significant levy on UK imports, Trump disrupted the already precarious state of global trade. The move was a clear signal to other nations that the US would not hesitate to use tariffs to achieve its political and diplomatic aims, regardless of the potential fallout. This type of economic brinkmanship, while not new under Trump, served to further erode trust in the global trading system. It reinforced the notion that the US was willing to impose unilateral measures that could have far-reaching consequences for its allies and adversaries alike. For countries around the world, Trump's actions raised the stakes of international relations, making it clear that trade was no longer a neutral or cooperative field, but a battleground for political influence. Trump's decision to wield tariffs as a tool of retribution also underscored his broader strategy of using economic leverage to achieve political goals. This approach was not limited to the UK, but had been a consistent feature of his foreign policy throughout his presidency. Whether it was his trade war with China or his efforts to renegotiate NAFTA, Trump demonstrated a willingness to prioritize economic measures over diplomatic norms. His administration's use of tariffs was often framed as an effort to level the playing field and ensure that the U.S. was not being taken advantage of in international trade agreements. However, in the case of the UK, the tariff was explicitly linked to political considerations, specifically, the Labour Party's involvement in U.S. electoral politics. For Trump, tariffs were a means to not only punish the UK economically, but to remind the world that the US held the reins in global economic matters. This economic strategy of using tariffs to assert political dominance had profound implications not just for the UK, but for global trade dynamics as a whole. Economists warned that the imposition of such tariffs could ripple across the global economy, creating a domino effect that would shrink global GDP by as much as 7%. The interconnected nature of modern economies means that disruptions in one major market can send shockwaves through the rest of the world, exacerbating inflation, disrupting supply chains, and hindering economic growth. In the case of the UK, the immediate fallout from the tariffs was likely to affect not only businesses and workers in the UK, but also economies across Europe and beyond. As global trade flows are interdependent, Trump's use of tariffs as a retaliatory tool also raised questions about the long-term sustainability of this approach. While the immediate economic consequences were dire, the longer-term effects on US-UK relations and broader global trade could be even more significant. For the UK, the imposition of tariffs could deepen the rift between the two nations, making it harder for future leaders to rebuild trust and cooperation. For Trump, while the tariffs sent a strong message, they also underscored the risks of using economic power in a way that could alienate allies and destabilize international markets. In essence, Trump's 20% tariff on UK imports was a high-stakes gamble that demonstrated his readiness to leverage economic measures for political purposes. His swift and decisive action highlighted the central role that economic power plays in modern international relations, where trade and politics are increasingly intertwined. The tariff not only inflicted significant damage on the UK, but also disrupted global trade dynamics, reinforcing Trump's stance that economic measures could and would be used to achieve diplomatic and political objectives. For the UK, this move underscored the dangers of misjudging international relations, as one political misstep had the potential to trigger a devastating economic consequence. The ramifications of this decision will be felt for years to come, shaping not just UK-US relations, but the broader trajectory of global economic policy. For Donald Trump, tariffs are more than just a tool of economic policy. They are a symbol of power and dominance. His administration's repeated use of tariffs, even against traditional allies like Canada and Mexico, demonstrated his willingness to use economic measures to reshape global trade dynamics and assert U.S. interests on his terms. This aggressive approach to international diplomacy has been a hallmark of Trump's leadership, where tariffs serve not only as a financial penalty, but as a means of reasserting control over trade and foreign relations. His recent actions toward the UK, imposing a significant 20% tariff in response to Keir Starmer's support of Kamala Harris, fit seamlessly into this strategy. By targeting the UK, Trump reinforced his view that economic pressure is an effective and immediate method for ensuring political influence. For Starmer, the situation presents a critical dilemma. On one hand, he could seek to engage directly with Trump, setting aside personal differences to negotiate a reduction in tariffs and protect the UK's economy. However, this approach could be seen as a capitulation, potentially undermining his credibility and political position. On the other hand, aligning with the European Union to confront Trump's tactics could deepen the rift between the UK and the US, risking further economic harm and diplomatic fallout. Both paths carry significant risks, both for the UK's economic stability and Starmer's political future. The stakes of this escalating conflict extend far beyond the UK, with the potential to destabilize the global economy. Experts have warned that if tariffs continue to rise, the world's interconnected markets could face serious disruptions. A sustained trade war could shrink global GDP, stoking inflation across nations, and deepening the economic challenges already facing countries struggling to recover from the pandemic and other economic crises. With trade routes disrupted and businesses facing higher costs, the global economy could experience widespread instability, further complicating recovery efforts in both advanced and developing economies. In this high-pressure environment, Keir Starmer's next moves are crucial. He must strike a delicate balance between maintaining the UK's national interests and addressing the diplomatic tensions with the US. Starmer faces a difficult decision. Should he engage in direct negotiations with Trump, risking the perception of weakness, or should he seek solidarity with the European Union and other global allies, which could escalate the rift with the US and worsen economic conditions? The outcome of this crisis will be largely shaped by how Starmer navigates these treacherous waters, determining not only the UK's immediate economic future, but its long-term standing on the world stage.